Killjoys and Puritans. That's how the tobacco industry described the anti-smoking lobby during the height of the smoking battle in the late 1970s. A Tobacco Institute spokesperson in a scathing attack said that anti-smokers are a small but vocal core of neo-prohibitionists, essentially a joyless tribe who want to manage everyone else's life. Certainly, this stinging critique of its enemies was in the tobacco industry's self-interest, but how far off was it? And could the same be said today of the public health movement and its war on vaping? After what seemed to be a quiet summer across Canada, many vapers continue to suffer. In Quebec, prohibitionist regulations have shut down online sales within the province, allowing tobacco enforcement to demand access in order to search the homes of individuals operating home-based mail-order businesses. If a suspicious quantity of vapor product is found, it could be seized as tobacco contraband. The Quebec provincial government is also stifling freedom of speech, banning retailers and their employees from sharing news stories, articles, and medical research about vaping with customers. But Quebec is not alone. Alberta Health Services is also stifling speech, barring its healthcare workers from answering questions about vaping or recommending vaping as a safer alternative to smoking. Joining us today to discuss some of the motivations behind the public health crusade to ban vaping is Chris Snowdon, author of the highly acclaimed book Velvet Glove, Iron Fist, which is a detailed history of the anti-smoking movement beginning as far back as 1604 with King James I of England.
And in 1604, James published an assault on smokers and smoking, the counterblast against tobacco. Why did he write the counterblast? I mean, where did this stand against tobacco come from? Do we know?
I suspect that it was not much more than he hated the smell of it. The word stink appears 12 times in Counterblast. The word smell appears 5 times. I think it might have come as a real shock to him when he moved down from Edinburgh to Scotland, how much smoke was going on. Foreign observers at the time commented at how amazed they are at people smoking everywhere, in theatres, in the streets, in the shops, and in the bars. You didn't have smoking like this really anywhere else in the world.
Chris, thanks again for coming on the show. Your work really is impressive. Here's my copy of Velvet Glove, Iron Fist with all of its dog ears. Please tell our audience, why did you write this book?
You have books about the tobacco industry, you have books about tobacco as a product and all this kind of thing. But there wasn't a single volume just about the anti-smoking people, not about the industry or the users or whatever, but just about the people who were trying to ban it. You got it with alcohol, you got it with drugs, but you didn't have it with tobacco, so I decided ultimately to write that book.
Do you find there are similarities between all of the prohibition movements?
The same people who are after tobacco are the same people who are after vaping, who are the same people who are after sugar and alcohol, but they just now call it a public health movement.
Chris, why do you think some jurisdictions have been able to ban vaping so easily?
If you look at how long it took to get smoking bans, and how gradual it was into workplaces and then into bars and clubs and now in some places outdoors. That was a huge effort and it encountered a lot of resistance, rightly so in my opinion. But with vaping bans, they're just tacked on now. They're just tacked on and nobody asked about it, partly because people are so used to being bossed around really by the government, that smoking bans were a big precedent in that respect, that it seems perfectly natural just to apply it to vaping without anybody really saying that it is bad for you, secondhand vapor. No one really makes that case very much, that there's any health hazard.
If it's not, as you say, the health hazards, Chris, then what do you think is behind the vaping bans?
I think there's a strong moral element amongst some, but not all, of the people who are campaigning against these things. I think a lot of them would have been well suited to the Anti-Saloon League and the Anti-Cigarette League and all these organizations from 100 years ago.
So public health has a bad case of moral superiority then?
Yeah, it's exactly that. They feel completely morally justified in what they're doing. They don't think essentially that people are actually enjoying the things that they are doing. They don't think that they have a true preference for what they're doing. They think in some way they're being manipulated, usually by industry or possibly their peers.
Chris, you mentioned the industry. I've often thought there might be a bias against vaping because the vaping industry blew up so fast and a lot of people are making a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of these people think that making money is morally suspect to start with, but to make money from a drug or to make money from something that is risky or unhealthy, I think is totally unacceptable to them. You're not going to be a free market ideologue if you're in public health. The whole thing about public health is industry is to blame for people's decisions. right? Nobody really wants to do these things. They're being manipulated by industry. Therefore, we have to destroy the industry. We have to take over the packaging. We have to decide how much things cost. We have to ban the advertising. All the main levers of capitalism are anathema to them. So you're not going to find many free market capitalists who are very keen on public health.
Chris, you hold a pretty decided opinion about public health. Was going after the movement part of the intent of your book?
Well, there ended up being a message there. You know, I am a free market liberal. I don't basically like being told what to do for my own good. At the same time, when I first got the idea of writing the book, I genuinely wasn't expecting it to turn out the way it did, and I wasn't planning on going after them, as you say. I just thought it would be an interesting and maybe slightly quirky story about some fairly eccentric people. But I just found with the later part of the story, you know, from the 90s really, there was so much, so many lies being told and so much manipulation of the evidence and the truth, and it was kind of difficult to remain neutral on that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, when you read Velvet Glove, I've clearly picked a side. There's no getting around from that. You try and present the facts as objectively as you can. But you know, there's no way I can pretend to not disagree with people like Stanton Glantz or Simon Chapman, and these people who I just see as bullies, really.
Chris, just so our audience knows who you're referencing, Simon Chapman is a professor in public health at the University of Sydney. He's an acclaimed anti-smoking advocate and a vocal campaigner against e-cigarettes. Stanton Glantz, who you also mentioned, should be very familiar to our viewers. Quite simply, he's the man who beat big tobacco, often called a crusader of the anti-tobacco movement. Glantz is also a vocal vaping critic, bolstered by his own research conducted at the Center for Tobacco Control, Research and Education at the University of California, San Francisco, for which he is the director. Chris, you use Chapman and Glantz as examples of a public health bully. Why?
They're the worst kind of coercive paternalist. They just don't seem to appreciate that some people just want to live their lives in a different way. They attack individuals, whether they be smokers or vapors, using the pretext that they're actually attacking industry, but they're not. So they actually think they're liberating people. That's when you have a real problem, when you have paternalists who completely disregard what people actually say they want to do and disregard what they actually are doing, and it gives people the sense that they have that high moral ground and that everybody who disagrees with them is either deluded or compromised.
Chris, as you know, there are big players like Public Health England and the Royal College of Physicians that have come out in support of vaping for harm reduction. Should vapers just hope for more health authorities to do the same?
Why do we have to hope that these people will kind of stick their thumbs up rather than down? It's great that Public Health England have come out and said that, you know, we think that e-cigarettes are 95% safer than vaping and we encourage them. But what if they had said the opposite? And I think we quite easily could have done. If they had done their review a couple of years earlier, they would have said this looks like a gateway. We don't want to encourage it. Why do we have to be told what to do with these people in the first place? Who are they? From where do they get their authority? Who voted them in?
Finally, Chris, what do you think the future holds for vaping?
I'm very, very confident about the whole vaping thing, and I'm in a way quite pleased that some of these public health dinosaurs have put their name on the record time and time again to spread disinformation about vaping, because I'm absolutely convinced that we will look back in the not very distant future and it will be universally agreed that vaping was a good thing.
Well, that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please like us on Facebook and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.